They pushed every boundary, twisted every knife, and savored every moment of your struggle. The truth is, certain people don't wound you by accident. They strike with intention, then they wait. They wait to witness you shatter, crumble, plead, or lose your grip. That's what fuels them. Disorder, suffering, humiliation. They constructed the snare, they scattered filth, they triggered your deepest wounds. And when you refused to respond the way they anticipated, it destabilized them in ways you couldn't possibly fathom, because you denied them the gratification. You didn't collapse. You didn't erupt. You didn't even tremble. You stood firm amid that wretched ordeal, encircled by slander, treachery, jealousy, and venom. And you navigated it with composure, with dignity, with the kind of silent fortitude that makes no sound yet leaves a resonance they cannot silence. You were never meant to endure that magnitude of contempt. You were never meant to depart with your spirit whole and your crown unbowed. They labeled you fragile. They probed your boundaries. They orchestrated a public spectacle and anticipated a public unraveling. Instead, you delivered something they were unprepared for. Stillness. That perilous form of stillness that declares, I witnessed your treachery and I refuse to shatter. If this message already mirrors your journey, tap the like button and subscribe. Not merely to champion this voice, but to reclaim authority over your own narrative. Thank you for standing with this purpose. This movement expands because of you. And now survey your surroundings. The quiet following the tempest speaks louder than the chaos ever did. The same souls who plotted your downfall now observe from afar, bewildered. Those who defamed your reputation now whisper among themselves, questioning whether you perceived everything all along. The serpents have coiled into silence, not because they've surrendered, but because they've recognized their defeat. And what proves more devastating than a serpent that strikes? A serpent that strikes and still emerges defeated. They claim the human mind requires less than a heartbeat to fracture in fury, yet it demands a lifetime of inner refinement to select mercy amid warfare. You didn't merely preserve your calm. You delivered a masterclass without uttering a syllable. That's not fragility, that's sovereignty, that's uncommon. That's what others cannot replicate, because anyone can retaliate. But not everyone can transcend and ascend above corruption without becoming corrupted. Some now attempt to erase the incident from memory. Others feign loyalty they never possessed. A select few even analyze your tactics in silence, attempting to decipher how you maintained your equilibrium when they recognize, in their depths, they would have crumbled. That distinction defines you. Not merely how you navigate triumph, but how you navigate betrayal. Anyone can beam when circumstances favor them, but you beamed when circumstances turned hostile. You never needed to amplify your voice. Your silence articulated more than language ever could. You never sought vengeance. Your restoration unveiled them more forcefully than revenge ever could, and now their petty scheme has boomeranged. The recognition they attempted to pilfer from you is now returning, not as sympathy but as reverence, because genuine souls witnessed what transpired. Authentic ones observed how you navigated it. And they're speaking. This transcends a single despicable chapter. It encompasses every consecutive chapter where you were shoved to the precipice, examined behind sealed doors, and abandoned solitary, while others mocked in your absence. And somehow, you refused to let that calcify your spirit. You refused to mirror their depravity. You evolved into something superior. There existed evenings when your chest tightened with grief, when you had to distance yourself from those you cherished, because they observed passively while others conspired to annihilate you. And that form of anguish doesn't dissolve effortlessly, but you bore it as armor. You didn't broadcast it, you didn't unleash it to the masses, you simply persisted. And that quiet, that patience, that's what rendered you formidable. You exist not to be anyone's instrument. You exist not to be dominated, manipulated, or muzzled. And what just unfolded demonstrated that to every observer. They assumed they could entomb you in filth, but they failed to recognize you were forged for adversity, and now every wound they inflicted merely refined your resilience. Welcome, Chosen One. Your narrative transcends mere power. It constitutes evidence, evidence that the cosmos never abandons the authentic, evidence that composure constitutes weaponry. And now observers perceive you through altered eyes, because what you just traversed would have annihilated most. But you You emerged with your illumination intact and your honor unblemished. Let's dissect this methodically, because your conduct in that moment transcended impressive. It became legendary, and listen attentively, chosen one. This subsequent portion is where everything aligns. If you've ever been wronged, slandered, driven to your threshold, and still maintained composure when pandemonium pleaded for your response, then this message was crafted specifically for you. Drop a 777 in the comments if you've ever been compelled to preserve your center while the world conspired to dismantle you. This constitutes more than a narrative. It represents your survival blueprint. Your silence communicated volumes. And now the same souls who derided you are quietly applauding behind sealed doors. That embodies authentic power. That embodies unshakable essence. And we've merely initiated, so recline, remain engaged, and absorb every syllable that follows. If you genuinely embody who you claim to be, a chosen one, then your essence won't permit you to navigate elsewhere. It'll draw you forward, heart receptive, prepared to internalize the truth. Because what approaches will not merely elucidate why they're so awestruck, it'll remind you precisely why you should be as well. Let's deconstruct everything progressively. Let's immerse ourselves. Capítulo 2. Facing the Challenge. With wisdom. Number 1, they scattered filth. You constructed a throne. Now they suffocate on the particles. The most perilous individual in any space isn't the most vocal. It's the one who observed everything, articulated nothing, and still departed unscathed. They never anticipated your endurance. Let's establish that clearly. They never anticipated your emergence from that repulsive circumstance with your essence whole and your intellect more acute than ever. No, they craved the spectacle. They fed upon it. They orchestrated your breakdown, your collapse, your self-annihilation before witnesses, while they masqueraded as innocent bystanders. That represented their design. But here's what struck them profoundly. You didn't merely endure, you ascended. You managed every fragment of that corruption like a chess grandmaster, observing pawns maneuver themselves into checkmate. And now they're confined to observing the replay in silence, pondering how someone possessing every justification to collapse somehow remained 10 moves ahead. You didn't merely traverse the chaos, you rendered the chaos inconsequential. That's the form of command they cannot endure. And that's why they persist in murmuring about you long after the tempest has subsided. Most would have fractured. Most would have seized the bait, the fabrications, the innuendo, the devastating blows, the treachery. It was engineered to provoke a disintegration. That's why they probed so aggressively. They required your reaction so they could feel superior about their own inadequacy. But you permitted them to suffocate in their own cacophony while you retained command. That's what torments them. Not your words, but your abstention. They cannot cease replaying it mentally. How you refused to shriek when they attempted to humiliate you. How you refused to rush forth to defend your reputation when they sullied it. How you preserved your dignity when their sole ambition was to witness your capitulation beneath duress. But rather than capitulating, you transcended. Rather than reacting, you refined. They anticipated chaos. You delivered mastery. You managed that circumstance like someone who'd witnessed this contest previously, like someone who recognized this wasn't the conclusion, it was the examination, and while they busied themselves attempting to tarnish you, they failed to recognize you'd already purified your circle, your spirit and your methodology. You were operating at an elevated stratum, a stratum where you don't merely endure corruption. You outmaneuver it without acquiring a single blemish. And yes, it was repulsive. Let's not sanitize it. Their conduct was sordid. The fabrications, the treachery, the hollow apologies, the character assassination campaigns. It was personal and it was savage. They yearned to witness your disintegration. They yearned to mock your decline. But what they received instead? Silence, poise, precision. You discomforted them without amplifying your volume. You compelled them to question themselves simply by maintaining your stance. Here's the element that genuinely unhinges them. They perceived you as feeble. That's why they selected you. They misinterpreted your compassion as naivety. They interpreted your composure as obliviousness. They were mistaken. And now they're recognizing it too late. Because the one they attempted to shatter is the one they secretly dread. The one they dismissed is the one they now revere. Even if their pride forbids acknowledgement, you didn't merely triumph. You exposed the entire framework. Your restraint resounded more forcefully than any eruption. Your serenity constituted a blade sharper than any affront. And your capacity to withdraw without filth adhering to your hands, that's what triggered their descent, because now the illumination they attempted to pilfer now illuminates them, and it's exposing everything they hoped would remain concealed. They underestimated the potency of self-mastery, of maintaining silence when every fiber yearned to scream, of preserving cleanliness when every stratagem aimed to contaminate your hands. But you recognized better. You perceived the trap. And you didn't merely evade it, you caused it to implode beneath its own mass. Now they're marinating in the chaos they manufactured while you've advanced to superior terrain. That's what authentic power manifests. It doesn't reside in volume. It resides in discipline, in restraint, in the extended strategy. And that's what you executed flawlessly. Every rumor, every setup, every counterfeit associate they deployed to drag your name through the muck merely burnished your character before those who matter. Now you traverse bearing the form of authority that requires no announcement because everyone already recognizes. They anticipated your bitterness. They anticipated your transformation into coldness, but instead you transformed into gold, quietly, elegantly, strategically. And that's why they're choking on bewilderment currently, because when someone hurls filth at you, they anticipate reciprocal filth. But you utilized it to construct something beyond their reach. Your throne, your lucidity, your forthcoming chapter. And no, it wasn't effortless. Don't permit anyone to convince you that such fortitude emerges without scars. Beneath that composure existed a battlefield. Beneath that silence existed evenings when slumber eluded you. But you selected evolution over vengeance, tranquility over pettiness. And now the very individuals who attempted to sully your name are compelled to inhabit the repercussions of their own nature. You didn't merely traverse corruption, you rewrote the entire definition of resilience. That's why they're awestruck. That's why they're unsettled. And that's why they persist in observing you from the periphery, contemplating how someone they attempted to enter could return more powerful, more intelligent, and more focused than ever. They remain oblivious, but you instructed them. You demonstrated what it resembles when someone requires no validation to achieve victory. You didn't require words to prove them wrong. You accomplished it with elegance. You didn't require public confrontation. You accomplished it through private restoration, and you didn't require retribution because the cosmos already accomplished that for you in its own tranquil, impeccable timing. They scattered filth, anticipating it would stain you. Instead, it exposed them. Now the entire chamber perceives the distinction, and you remain pristine, still ascending, still perilous in your quietude, still the chosen one. Capítulo 3. Why your response stood out. Number 2, you ascended without machinations, and now they cannot tolerate the vista from beneath. Authentic power never demands attention. It enters uninvited and transforms the environment. The most vocal individual in any chamber frequently embodies the most fragile, the one observed in silence. That's the genuine threat. They constructed ladders from fabrications. You constructed one from discipline. And now yours genuinely touches the heavens. You didn't purloin the crown, you became irrefutable, and the universe bestowed it upon you regardless. They cannot conceptualize it, and it corrodes them. In their realm, authority is sordid. It's exchanged like clandestine transactions, murmured in gossip enclaves, and constructed upon the foundations of treachery. They had to claw for recognition, barter their principles for visibility, feign grandeur they never possessed simply to experience relevance. And then you entered. Not vociferous, not ostentatious, not striving, simply authentic. And suddenly, you became the one they couldn't cease observing. That's what genuinely terrifies them. You didn't deceive to arrive here. You didn't manipulate strings, crush spirits, or engage in games. You simply persisted in arriving with veracity in your tone and purpose, in your bearing, while they were fabricating strength. You were embodying it. And now, without exertion, You've claimed the form of authority they would exchange their souls to possess. But here's the decisive element. You didn't claim it from anyone, you earned it. And that's what destabilizes their cognition most profoundly. Envision this: a chamber filled with performers, each amplifying beyond the previous, desperate for recognition, fabricating confidence, crafting personas, pursuing approval like oxygen. Then you enter, silent, centered, present, and the chamber transforms. Not because you sought dominance, but because your essence proved too authentic to dismiss. That's your function, that's your identity. And they perceived it, even while feigning ignorance. They've invested years engineering moments that mimic success. You embodied success through maintained authenticity. They employed shortcuts, alliances, and distractions. You employed patience, discipline, and evolution. They constructed images. You constructed impact. And now their entire conception of what authority resembles is being dismantled in real time because someone resembling you isn't designed to triumph within their framework. Yet you did, and you continue triumphing. Let's establish clarity. You didn't acquire authority by pilfering it from another. You required nothing of the sort. While they incinerated bridges for notoriety, you were quietly establishing foundations for your destiny. While they pursued ovation, you were constructing character in silence. While they required others to embrace a fabricated version of themselves, you evolved into a version of yourself that defied denial. And that embodies authentic power, the variety that doesn't merely transform chambers, it transforms souls. They observe you now with a mixture of reverence and discomfort, because it shouldn't have been you. Correct? That's their conviction. You weren't sufficiently loud, weren't sufficiently artificial, weren't sufficiently ruthless. But what eluded them was how profoundly rooted you were. They couldn't perceive that while they sprouted rapidly, you were cultivating strength. And then, the tempest arrived. And observe who remains standing. Perhaps you've pondered why individuals who previously dismissed you now feign interest. Why those who ridiculed you now echo your lexicon. Why those who attempted to diminish your radiance now appear blinded by it. It's not happenstance, it's revelation. They invested years vending illusions, but you materialized with substance, and substance perpetually outlasts spectacle. Let's deconstruct this. You didn't network your way into respect, you evolved into respectability. You didn't plead for affection or allegiance, you evolved into lovable and unshakably devoted to your mission. You didn't shriek for acknowledgement. You existed in such fashion that even your silence communicated volumes. That's how authentic authority functions. When it's genuine, it doesn't push. It pulls, and now they're being pulled regardless of their preference. And oh, how circumstances have reversed. Now they occupy meetings quoting the identical principles they once ridiculed you for embodying. They feign lifelong support, hoping no one recalls what they articulated behind your back. But the truth resides within the transformation, and everyone senses it. You didn't merely acquire authority, you redefined what authority embodies. You didn't merely ascend. You exposed every fabrication they employed to rationalize their counterfeit ascent. Envision someone planting seeds privately, nourishing them with consistency, shielding them from the clamor. No crowd, no spotlight, merely labor, merely evolution. And then one day those roots breach the surface and observers feign astonishment. Yet it wasn't sudden. It was earned. That's you. Your evolution wasn't accidental. It was inevitable. And now they witness the harvest while theirs never materialized. They inquire, how did you accomplish this? You didn't. You embodied it. You evolved into the variety of person whose essence communicates before you speak. The variety who doesn't recoil beneath pressure because you've already transcended worse. The variety who doesn't perform because nothing remains to demonstrate. You didn't await permission. You bestowed upon yourself approval long ago, and that's what genuinely corrodes them. You didn't pursue authority. Authority pursued you because authentic authority is magnetic. It discovers those who remain solid even when unobserved. And now the very individuals who previously discounted you cannot cease monitoring your movements. Quietly envious, profoundly impressed, and apprehensive to acknowledge how extensively they're absorbing from you. Let's acknowledge reality. They're bewildered. They executed every prescription they'd been provided. flatter superiors, engage in politics, fabricate friendships, pursue status, and still they experience emptiness. Meanwhile, you preserved authenticity, and you're fulfilled. Filled with respect, filled with purpose, filled with influence that genuinely signifies something. Because while they performed authority, you were embodying the genuine article, and that's why they perpetuate your name in their discourse. Not to assail you further, but to comprehend you. Because somewhere within they recognize what you've constructed cannot be fabricated, cannot be replicated, cannot be purchased. It emerged from anguish, from evolution, from departing when conformity proved simpler, from trusting your trajectory when others remained blind to it. You didn't merely ascend, you transformed the parameters, and now you're not merely respected. You're studied, you're referenced, you're the one they instruct others to observe intently, because what you accomplished and who you've evolved into exposes everything they executed incorrectly. And nothing destabilizes a deceiver more than someone who achieved everything through truth. They'll never acknowledge it. Yet you succeeded without them. You transcended them. You advanced beyond them. And the optimal element, you succeeded without ever mirroring them. Still the chosen one, still ascending, still untouchable. Number 3, you traversed fire and emerged without reeking of smoke. They discarded refuse in your direction, anticipating reciprocal disposal. Instead, you established distance, departed pristine, and abandoned them immersed in their own stench. You can identify the contamination and still refuse to immerse yourself. That's what distinguishes leaders from reactors. Let's characterize it accurately. Emotional contamination. You witnessed the backstabbing. You absorbed the whispering. You detected the bitterness concealed behind counterfeit concern, and still you refused absorption. That's incomprehensible to most, because they would have lost themselves within the pandemonium. Yet you didn't. You clutched your identity like a shield and declared, "This contamination won't transform me." Envision being encircled by smoke and still selecting non-inhalation. That was you. Individuals fail to recognize how rapidly anguish transmutes into poison, how treachery can stain character when vigilance wanes. Most succumb. They begin mirroring the identical behavior they despise. They reciprocate with filth. They permit bitterness to establish roots and flourish. Yet not you. You perceived the contamination and stepped over it, without permitting even a droplet to adhere to your souls. You could have matched their frequency. You could have released revelations that would have inverted the entire chamber. You possessed truth and possessed every entitlement to strike back. Yet instead you selected what most never consider: peace. You selected non-transformation into the entity that attempted your destruction. And that destabilized them more profoundly than any vengeance ever could. Now individuals whisper upon your entrance, not because of scandal, but because of command. They recollect how you carried yourself while being dragged through damnation. They recollect that you didn't transform into coldness, spite, or vindictiveness. You remained grounded, clear, undisturbed. That's what distinguishes you. That's why they persist in attempting to decipher you. You didn't triumph by engaging their contest. You triumphed by transforming the parameters. Your authority didn't emerge from retaliation. It emerged from restraint. And now the identical individuals who attempted to portray you as fragile cannot cease observing your luminescence. You perceived the refuse and still emerged pristine. That's legendary. Capítulo 4. Strength through self-control. Number 4. They constructed a trap. You constructed a stage. The trap they engineered to devastate you transformed into the spotlight they inadvertently provided. They attempted to silence your voice. Now it reverberates more forcefully than their fabrications ever could. Let's not distort this. They didn't merely desire your collapse. They desired your collapse before an audience. This transcended petty insult or harmless drama. It constituted a calculated scheme, meticulously crafted rumors, precisely timed treachery, pressure from those you trusted, all engineered to dismantle you and document the destruction. They didn't desire justice. They desired reaction. Something they could reference, edit, and replay. One furious instant, one emotional misstep, and their entire campaign against you would have achieved completion. Yet you declined the bait. You perceived the heat ascending, your nerves stretching thin, your impulses demanding response. You recognized their methodology, and still you remained grounded. You didn't shriek, you didn't erupt, you didn't deliver the disintegration they craved witnessing. Instead, you permitted them to speak while you constructed. You permitted them to deceive while you absorbed. You permitted them to believe they were triumphing while you evolved into invulnerability. Envision this: someone excavating a pit for your descent, yet you gather the earth, mold it, and construct steps from it. That's your methodology. You transformed that scheme into strategy. You transformed gossip into evolution, and that's the element that devours them. Their scheme didn't merely fail, it became the very mechanism that elevated you. They anticipated your collapse. What they received was your resurgence. Now observers perceive you and witness someone who transcended fire without becoming bitter. They witness someone who could have retaliated with truth, yet selected silence over spectacle. They witness someone who didn't pursue revenge and still triumphed. And the element they'll never vocalize, they respect you for it because profoundly they recognize they would have collapsed beneath identical pressure. You required nothing to demonstrate. Your progress accomplished that for you. They attempted to shatter you. Instead you constructed, and now they cannot endure the vista from beneath. Capítulo 5. Let your character lead. Number 5. You didn't shout for respect. You became the reason they fell silent. When you recognize your value, you don't plead for accommodation. You enter and become the reason the entire table rearranges. Authentic authority doesn't announce itself. It exists. It moves. It radiates and compels the world to accommodate. They anticipated clamor from you. They awaited an emotional tirade, an elaborate justification, a desperate attempt to be observed, heard, and comprehended. They craved spectacle, something to roll their eyes toward and declare, "Observe, we knew they were fragile," yet you denied them that. You didn't plead your case because you recognized the truth. Only the insecure perform for those who've predetermined their conclusions. You weren't desperate for acknowledgement. You were preoccupied with becoming irrefutable. You never appeared in their invisible tribunal. You recognized the trial was predetermined regardless, populated with those possessing no intention of witnessing your brilliance. Instead, you departed calmly, quietly, and then you embodied the very essence they attempted to deny your worthiness of. Envision traversing past a crowd that doubted you, not with words but with impact. No screaming, no pleading, simply irrefutable essence. That's your methodology. You didn't inform them of your identity. You demonstrated it incrementally, choice by choice. While they recycled identical counterfeit narratives and exhausted labels, you were constructing quietly, relentlessly. They were addicted to ovation. You were committed to advancement. That's what genuinely destabilized them. You didn't compete for the spotlight. You permitted your achievements to illuminate for you, and when the luminescence emerged, it wasn't forced. It was earned. No speech required, no clout pursuit, simply presence. Authentic presence. That exceptional variety of presence that cannot be purchased, fabricated, or replicated. Now they're scrambling to rewrite history, attempting to infiltrate spaces they once proclaimed you'd never occupy, pretending they always recognized your ascension. Yet the truth remains they never believed in you, not because you lacked value, but because they couldn't perceive beyond their own limitations. And now, while you inhabit the existence they declared you'd never achieve, they're left articulating explanations to themselves. You didn't demonstrate your value, you became the demonstration. And now the chamber exists in silence. Number 6. You starved their chaos and they choked on the silence. The loudest fabrication perishes most rapidly when ignored by truth. They discarded bait. You introduced boundaries. When you cease nourishing performers, the entire circus dismantles and vanishes. They weren't courageous. They were famished. Famished for attention, for reaction, for anything deployable to drag you into the muck. So, they stirred the vessel with fabrications, gossip, and superficial drama, anticipating your fracture. That was the entire objective, not to expose you, but to provoke you. Because if they could extract a vocal reaction, even a minor one, they could spin it into narrative, portray you as unstable, label you bitter, position themselves as victims while feigning innocence. Yet what did you execute? Nothing. And that's what shattered them. You didn't erupt. You didn't flee toward social platforms. You didn't respond. You didn't correct the fabrication. You didn't even tremble. You perceived the contest and declined the invitation. You permitted them to perform alone in obscurity, while you maintained laser focus upon your illumination. And that silence, that stillness, that calm refusal to engage within their dysfunction, it famished them. Envision a parasite lacking a host. That's what you transformed them into, empty, lost, clawing at shadows. They didn't desire peace, they desired fuel. And when you denied provision, their entire scheme imploded beneath its own mass. Because demons don't require facts. They require reaction. And when you extracted that, they retained nothing to spin. That's what most fail to comprehend. Silence isn't weakness. It's a strategic maneuver. It's the variety of strength that requires no self-justification. You didn't require retaliation because you recognized truth resounded louder than any fabrication, and it perpetually discovers its path toward surface. And while they attempted to sustain the conflagration, they neglected one element. Without oxygen, flames extinguish. You selected non-engagement because you comprehended something sacred. Your peace isn't negotiable. Your energy isn't complementary. You don't hurl diamonds at canines and anticipate them perceiving worth. You recognized what you carried and you protected it like sovereignty. Now observe their campaign has quieted, their stratagems have dissolved, their counterfeit narratives have disintegrated. And you persist ascending, persisting radiant, persisting invulnerable because you didn't nourish the demons. You permitted them to starve. Number 7, you maintained your fire, and they sustained burns from their own smoke. Silence isn't weakness. It's evidence that you don't require noise to generate seismic impact. The most eloquent demonstration involves departing chaos with your peace preserved. They interpreted your silence as capitulation, that you were terrified, powerless, vanquished. Yet they couldn't have been more mistaken. What they perceived as fragility was the variety of strength they'll never possess, the strength to preserve composure when everything surrounding you demands eruption. You possessed every justification to fracture. You possessed truth ammunition, the variety of language capable of inverting the entire circumstance and exposing every participant within the chaos. Yet you didn't deploy them. You didn't strike. You didn't shriek. You selected peace over pettiness. And that decision generated more resonance than any eruption ever could. Most confuse chaos with authority. They believe generating spectacle indicates triumph. Yet you demonstrated an elevated caliber of command, the variety emerging from someone who's already transcended the games being executed. You weren't silent because you were fragile. You were silent because you possessed wisdom. You comprehended that not every conflagration requires extinguishing. Some merely require self-consumption to ash while you persist walking. Envision someone hurling everything at you. Affronts, rumors, manipulation, and you simply observe them as beneath your energy. That's restraint, that's elegance confronting madness. You didn't respond because you recognized truth didn't require defense. You recognized your reputation wasn't constructed upon public endorsement. It was constructed upon private discipline, and that's something they'll never comprehend. They anticipated fireworks. Instead, they received a mirror. Your silence compelled them to inhabit their conduct. No distractions, no battles to distort the narrative, no emotional eruptions to conceal behind. Merely them, their fabrications, and the resonance of your absence. And the longer that silence extended, the louder it resonated. Because profoundly they recognized if roles reversed, they would have lost command. They would have shattered every relationship, incinerated every bridge, and dragged everyone into their tempest. Yet you became the calm succeeding it. You didn't merely depart. You left a message behind. I could have devastated you, yet I selected healing instead, and that haunts them beyond what fury ever could. Number 8. You evolved into the reflection that demolished their illusion. You didn't expose them through words. You exposed them by existing with integrity they couldn't fabricate. When fabrication encounters existence grounded in truth, it shatters without sound. You didn't drag anyone's reputation through contamination. You didn't broadcast secrets or execute character assassination. All you executed was stand still, calm, clear, and unapologetically grounded in your truth, and somehow that destabilized them beyond any confrontation ever could. Because when someone habitually spins narratives and manipulates perception, nothing threatens more than someone who refuses participation. You didn't require calling them out. You embodied the call out. You became the mirror they never desired confronting. Every occasion they witnessed you transcending chaos, it reminded them of their own degraded conduct. Every occasion you preserved calm while they schemed, it reflected precisely how uncontrolled they genuinely were. Your grace exposed their greed. Your loyalty revealed their disloyalty. Your silence emphasized their noise, and the more you maintained your elevation, the more their facade commenced slipping. Envision attempting to characterize someone as unstable, while they're existing, moving like stone, still centered and focused. That's what unsettled them. Their fabrications appeared ridiculous, adjacent to your composure. Their chaos forfeited its potency, adjacent to your peace. They weren't prepared for that variety of contrast. They anticipated dragging you into contamination. Instead, they terminated drowning within their own reflection. You didn't evolve into the adversary. You evolved into the evidence. Every fragment they attempted concealing, the envy, the backstabbing, the insecurity surfaced simply because you didn't collapse. And that's what's driving them into dissent now. Not because you wounded them, but because proximity to you reveals the truth they dread confronting. They never possessed command. They never possessed power. They were never as formidable or intelligent or elevated as they feigned. You didn't require fighting them. You merely required being you, and that proved sufficient to shatter the illusion. Still ascending, still observing their dissolution, all because you evolved into the singular element they couldn't annihilate, their own reflection. Number 9. You moved as though the cosmos documented everything because it did. Certain individuals behave appropriately when observed. You behaved appropriately when no one applauded, and that's why you're triumphing in silence. You didn't retaliate. You remained aligned, and now the karma they ridiculed is knocking upon their own threshold. You managed everything like someone who recognized truth perpetually returns home, even when it takes the extended route. While they maneuvered secretly, whispering in shadows and laughing as though consequence would never materialize. You walked as though the atmosphere surrounding you was sacred because it was. You comprehended what they didn't. Nothing remains genuinely concealed. Not energy, not motives, not intentions, and certainly not the repercussions. You could have retaliated. You could have descended into vulgarity, matched their pettiness, and fed into the tempest they manufactured. Yet you didn't. Not because you couldn't, but because you maintained awareness of something deeper. You weren't contemplating short-term victory. You were contemplating long-term peace. You were contemplating remaining aligned with something vastly more powerful than their gossip or their schemes. You didn't diminish your standards for temporary satisfaction. You elevated your spirit for permanent protection. They performed as though rules didn't exist. You existed as though every movement mattered. And that's what rendered you invulnerable. You didn't require audience. You weren't awaiting applause. You recognized integrity isn't something worn like costume. It's your identity when unobserved. While they fabricated goodness for cameras, you existed truthfully when no one observed. And now the script is reversing because the cosmos overlooks nothing. The identical ones who whispered fabrications privately are being exposed publicly. The identical ones who mocked your silence are now stunned by your luminescence. You didn't shriek your path toward justice. You permitted time execute the heavy lifting. You permitted truth reveal itself as it perpetually does, slowly, perfectly, and without requiring your involvement. You preserved your spirit pristine even when contamination flew. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Now observers perceive you differently. Not because you generated noise, but because you generated sense. Because you preserved your peace when everything within you yearned to roar. Because you behaved like someone who recognized the cosmos maintains records. You passed an examination they didn't recognize they were taking. And now your silence crowns you more loudly than any praise ever could. Numero 10. You didn't merely survive the conflagration. You reconstructed the blueprint within the flames. They anticipated your emergence shattered. Instead, you emerged sculpted. What attempted interring you failed, recognizing you weren't escaping. You were evolving. This wasn't a pristine escape. This wasn't rapid recovery or fortunate turn. What you endured could have wrecked you, not merely emotionally but spiritually. Most would have limped forth, hauling shame, resentment, and the distorted narrative others attempted imposing upon them. Yet not you. You didn't merely escape that chaos. You confronted it directly, reshaped it, and departed carrying something unanticipated: power. You didn't await debris clearing before reclaiming your identity. You reclaimed it within the smoke. You traversed that conflagration and permitted it incinerate the previous version, the version that previously over-explained, diminished excessively, or performed too cautiously. That circumstance wasn't your conclusion. It was your forge, the location where your subsequent level originated. Envision someone presenting you with shattered glass, anticipating your bleeding. Yet you collected it and constructed stained windows from it. That's your methodology. You didn't deny the anguish. You transformed it into design. You didn't flee from what wounded. You extracted meaning. You occupied the discomfort and inquired deeper questions. What lesson resides within? What can I extract that will never abandon me again? And those answers, they constructed the version of you now impossible to dismiss. That's why your presence resonates distinctly now. It's not merely what you transcended, it's how you transcended it. You didn't seek sympathy, you discovered strength. You didn't plead to be observed. You evolved so transparent within yourself that people possessed no alternative but to notice. They sense it within your energy now. The stillness, the clarity, the unshakable core. Because you didn't merely progress. You reconstructed. Wiser, smarter, pristine. And those who attempted defining you through your decline, they're bewildered because the version they attempted leaving shattered no longer exists. You didn't transport the chaos. You transformed it into something sacred. You redefined what resilience manifests. And through that you redefined yourself. You didn't flee. You ascended. And now, every step you execute serves as reminder. You weren't merely examined. You were transformed. Capítulo 6. Final encouragement number 11. You permitted the fabrication decay, and now they're choking on the stench. Fabrications move rapidly, yet perish unattractively. Truth moves slowly, yet interred everything counterfeit in silence. You didn't combat conflagration with conflagration. You permitted time serve as wind, and it dispersed their diminutive campfire of gossip into ashes. You recognized their methodology. It never concerned truth, it concerned velocity, how rapidly they could poison atmosphere before anyone possessed opportunity for inquiry. So they moved swiftly, whispered fabrications within chambers you weren't invited, constructed false narrative, and circulated it like concealed menu. The objective never involved accuracy, it involved attention. Yet you didn't tremble. You didn't pursue every fabrication. You didn't attempt arguing with those committed to misunderstanding you because you recognized something most never acquire. Fabrications age like milk, not wine. While they busied distorting facts, you remained stationary, silent, unshaken. You weren't panicking because you comprehended truth's timeline. You recognized it perpetually returns, not with explosion, but with quiet clarity, dismantling every counterfeit narrative incrementally. And now it's occurring. The identical individuals who previously judged you remain bewildered. The mathematics fails aligning. Their narrative version crumbles, and you haven't articulated a word. Envision planting truth like seed and departing. No irrigation, no urgency, simply trusting that when timing aligns, it'll blossom, and when it does, it exposes everything constructed upon shallow foundation. That's your methodology. And now the fabrication rots. The characters within their diminutive narrative cannot maintain their lines aligned. Those who believed them experience embarrassment. And those who assisted spreading the chaos, they're slipping through side exits silently. You never required performing. You never required retaliating. You recognized what they didn't. Truth exercises patience, yet never passivity. It might arrive tardily, yet perpetually arrives prepared. And when it does, it doesn't knock. It demolishes the door. Now they scramble while you remain poised. You didn't merely permit the fabrication perish. You permitted it decompose naturally, perfectly, and without ever fracturing your composure. And that's what renders your silence louder than their character assassination ever achieved. Number 12. You departed their stage, and now the spotlight pursues you regardless. They pleaded for attention. You constructed character in silence, and now the resonance of your restraint exceeds their entire performance. You weren't silent because you possessed no narrative. You were silent because your narrative required no audience for authenticity. They craved spectacle. They yearned for drama, one wherein you'd explain, plead, publish lengthy paragraphs, and attempt salvaging your reputation as though existence depended upon public endorsement. Yet you recognized better. You didn't enter the tribunal of public opinion because you recognized it wasn't justice they craved. It was entertainment. And you weren't prepared surrendering dignity for another's drama indulgence. You permitted them speaking. You permitted them distorting. You permitted them weeping performative tears within spaces you never entered. You weren't interested in sympathy. You weren't desperate for approval. You were determined remaining whole, and that variety of strength requires no defense. It requires no ovation. It merely requires alignment, and you possessed it. While they scrambled appearing innocent, you remained innocent. While they spun narratives preserving relevance, you remained silent and relevant regardless. And the more you departed, the more the chamber commenced recognizing something failed aligning. How does the one not defending themselves appear as the sole one still grounded in truth? Because, profoundly, people sense energy. And your energy never fabricated. You didn't publish evidence. You didn't plead comprehension. You didn't package your anguish, rendering it more digestible for others. And that's what rendered you authentic. That's what rendered you invulnerable. Because while they performed anguish for notoriety, you were healing for peace. And healing requires no audience. Envision a tribunal where everyone's shrieking, pointing fingers, performing roles, and you're absent from the structure. That's your methodology. You exited the narrative and evolved into the proof. You didn't escape judgment. You transcended it. And now the spotlight they contested so aggressively incinerates them alive. The performances unravel. The sympathy fades. And you command the chamber. Not because you engaged the contest, but because you refused submission. Number 13. You defeated them without becoming them, and that's why they cannot sleep. They assumed filth was the exclusive pathway toward triumph until you materialized pristine and departed bearing the crown. You didn't bend, fracture, or plead, and that's the element they'll never comprehend. From inception, they discounted you, not because you lacked capability, but because you refused descending. Within a world addicted to power maneuvers, psychological warfare, and clandestine transactions, your pristine hands were perceived as liability. They misinterpreted your principles as passivity, your kindness as softness, your calm as weakness. They believed the exclusive pathway toward ascension required lying, cheating, and traversing over others. So when you entered the tableau, moving differently, they laughed. Yet you weren't present, conforming to their mold. You were present, shattering it. You didn't gossip, securing favor. You didn't play dual allegiances. You didn't sabotage anyone, simply climbing slightly faster. And yet here you stand, still standing, still ascending, still generating discourse. Not because you manipulated your ascent, but because you outlasted them all with dignity. That's what's depriving them of sleep. You demonstrated that strategy differs from scheming, that timing differs from trickery, that integrity persists, triumphing within a world that forgot its appearance. Envision traversing a chamber filled with serpents and never stepping upon one, because you required nothing of the sort. Your presence proved sufficient, scattering them. That's your methodology. You didn't cast shade. You didn't retaliate. You didn't engage the contest. You rendered the contest irrelevant. They busied drawing battle lines while you were constructing blueprints for peace. You didn't merely claim the elevated path, you rendered it appear powerful. Now they panic because you exposed the fabrication they've perpetuated internally for years. That corruption constitutes survival. That kindness embodies naivety. Yet you invert it entirely. You preserved authenticity and still concluded atop. You retained your values and still secured victory, and now those who swore you'd never endure secretly attempt studying your blueprint without acknowledgement. You didn't combat with vulgarity. You stood tall, and the crown fits superior because you never required theft. You didn't merely survive their manipulated system, you transcended it pristine. And as debris ultimately settles, one truth stands elevated beyond all fabrications, chaos, and treachery. You didn't merely manage a repulsive circumstance, you transformed through it. You remained pristine within a sordid contest, and now even your silence echoes louder than their noise ever achieved. Your narrative constitutes evidence that restraint embodies power, and truth perpetually triumphs, regardless of temporal delay. If this message resonated with your essence, ensure liking, subscribing, dropping 77 within the comments, and sharing this.